They kidnapped my children. The HOA actually took them, claiming I had violated their sacred community rules. Why? Because they believed I had illegally purchased a home in a 55-plus community. Except, I didn't. My lawyer proved my property was outside their jurisdiction. But the HOA didn't know who they were messing with because I'm not just any homeowner. I'm a federal judge, and they just committed the worst legal blunder of their pathetic lives. How far would you go if the HOA took your family? Welcome to my channel. If you love insane HOA revenge stories, hit that subscribe button because this one is wild. The morning started like any other coffee brewing, the scent of toast filling the kitchen, and my two kids, Alex and Sophie, chattering about their upcoming soccer tournament. I was reviewing case notes for an upcoming federal court session when I heard the unmistakable rustling of papers being shoved through my mail slot. Another notice from the HOA. I sighed, already prepared for another petty complaint about grass height or mailbox colors. But as I unfolded the letter, my breath caught. Final warning. You are in violation of HOA residency requirements. Immediate eviction required. All unauthorized minors must be removed from the premises within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in further action. I frowned. Unauthorized minors? I reread the line, my pulse beginning to race. My home, a beautiful 3-bedroom colonial, sat outside of their community lines. When I bought it, I had explicitly ensured with my lawyer that my property was not subject to their HOA. I even had county zoning maps proving it. But now, these busybodies were claiming I had broken their so-called age restriction rule, stating no one under 55 could reside in the neighborhood. I tossed the letter onto the counter and grabbed my phone. "Elliot, we have a problem," I said as soon as my attorney picked up. "The HOA is trying to evict my kids." Elliot sighed. "We went through this during closing. Your house is not part of the HOA jurisdiction. It's a scare tactic. I'll send a cease and desist letter today." That should have been the end of it. A minor annoyance. A typical HOA overstep, but I underestimated just how far these people were willing to go. The next day, I arrived home to a gut-wrenching silence. No laughter, no video game sounds, no clinking of dishes, just silence. Panic crawled up my spine. "Alex? Sophie?" I called, rushing inside. The house was eerily empty. My stomach churned as I noticed both their backpacks sitting by the door, untouched from this morning. Their sneakers were still neatly lined up. My gut told me something was wrong. I yanked my phone from my pocket and dialed my son, straight to voicemail. My daughters, same thing. The panic turned ice cold. I tried their friends' parents. No one had seen them. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm but firm. "Sir, are you reporting a missing persons case?" I opened my mouth, but my throat was dry. "Yes, my two children, they're missing." The next 2 hours were a blur, officers arriving, combing through the house, asking me the same questions over and over. When did I last see them? Did I notice anything strange? Any enemies? As a federal judge, I had plenty of enemies, but no criminal had ever dared to come near my children. Then, an officer standing by my mailbox turned, frowning. "Sir, we found this." He held out another HOA letter, this one taped to my door. My fingers clenched around the paper as I read. "As your unauthorized tenants have failed to vacate, the HOA has taken steps to ensure compliance. Your children will be held in a safe location until this matter is resolved." My vision blurred with rage. I presided over hundreds of federal cases. I had seen criminal enterprises, human traffickers, corrupt politicians, but never had I seen a damn HOA kidnap children. The officers read over my shoulder, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. Did your HOA just admit to taking your kids?" one officer asked, disbelief in his voice. I exhaled sharply, hands trembling. "Yes," I said, forcing myself to stay calm, "and they have no idea who they just messed with." A search began immediately. Officers swarmed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, questioning HOA board members, but suddenly no one seemed to know anything. My neighbor, Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman who always baked cookies for my kids, tugged me aside. "Judge, I saw something strange this morning," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Two men in suits never seen them before came to your house after you left. Your kids got into a black SUV. They didn't look scared, but they didn't look happy either." My pulse pounded. "Where did they go?" "They drove toward the HOA clubhouse," she said, lowering her voice. "I thought maybe they were being taken to some after-school event. But now," she trailed off, fear in her eyes. That was enough for me. I turned to the officers. We're going to that clubhouse, now. The police escorted me as I stormed through the HOA's front doors. Karen Wilkes, the self-proclaimed president of this power-hungry dictatorship, sat behind a massive mahogany desk, smiling like a smug snake. "Ah, Judge Carter, I was expecting you," she purred, adjusting her pearl necklace. "How dare you?" I slammed the letter onto her desk, voice shaking with fury. "Where are my children?" Karen tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Your illegal tenants have been relocated to a more appropriate environment until this matter is sorted out." The officers beside me exchanged uneasy glances. I forced myself to breathe. "That's kidnapping," I said, voice dangerously low. "Do you understand what you've done?" Karen's eyes gleamed. "Oh, please, don't be dramatic. They're at a board-approved interim guardianship facility while we finalize their removal." My nails dug into my palms. This lunatic actually believed what she was saying. Where are they? I enunciated every word carefully because if I didn't, I might have snapped her neck right there. She let out a breathy laugh. "Somewhere safe. Now, I suggest you stop making a scene, Judge Carter. After all, the HOA has rules." "Rules? Rules?" She had stolen my children, and she was talking about rules. But she had made a fatal mistake, thought she had the upper hand. I turned to the officers. "You heard her. She's openly admitting to detaining minors without consent." The lead officer, a man who had clearly dealt with HOA nonsense before but never at this level, straightened. "Mrs. Wilkes, if you don't tell us where the children are immediately, you'll be charged with felony unlawful detainment, conspiracy, and endangerment of minors." Karen's smile faltered, but she held her ground. "This is a civil matter, officer. We are merely enforcing community standards." "Shut the hell up," I snapped, finally letting my rage show. "I'm a federal judge, you lunatic. Do you really think I don't know the law? This isn't a civil matter. This is federal kidnapping." Karen's confidence cracked. She wasn't used to pushback. She was used to winning through intimidation and bureaucracy. But not today. Not against me. She licked her lips, shifting nervously. Before she could finish, officers stepped behind her, pulling out cuffs. "Mrs. Wilkes, you're under arrest for unlawful detainment." Wait! She screeched, struggling as they snapped cuffs onto her wrists. "They're at Lakewood Christian Academy." I didn't wait. I didn't speak. I ran. I drove like a madman. The speed limit meant nothing. Red lights blurred past as I sped toward Lakewood Christian Academy, my tires screeching with every sharp turn. The police sirens blared behind me, but I barely noticed. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my heart hammering in my chest. They had my kids. That psychotic HOA thought they could kidnap my children and treat them like property in their little rule book. They had no idea what they'd just done. The second I pulled into the school's parking lot, I threw my car into park and bolted out the door before the engine even fully shut off. Officers were already rushing past me toward the entrance. The school looked perfectly normal, kids playing on the playground, parents picking up their children. But I knew somewhere inside, Alex and Sophie were being held against their will under some fabricated excuse. My mind raced through every possible legal scenario they had charged me with, what lies they had spun, but it didn't matter. This was kidnapping. This was a crime. And I was about to make sure every last person involved burned for it. The principal, a frazzled-looking man in his 60s, met us at the front office. "What is the meaning of this?" he sputtered as uniformed officers flooded inside. "Sir," the lead officer said, holding up the HOA's notice, "do you have 2 children here under the custody of the Willow Creek HOA?" The principal blinked, clearly confused. "Ohis, but where are they?" I cut in, my voice like ice. The man swallowed hard and motioned toward the back hallway. "Room 214, but..." I didn't wait. I ran, my shoes pounding against the tile. "Room 214. Room 214. My blood roared in my ears as I grabbed the handle and shoved the door open with so much force that it slammed against the wall. There they were, my kids. Alex and Sophie sat at 2 desks, looking frightened but unharmed. A woman in a stiff navy suit stood beside them, her eyes widening in shock as I stormed in. "Who the hell are you?" she snapped, stepping between me and my children. I ignored her, rushing forward and pulling them both into my arms. "Dad," Sophie sobbed, clutching my shirt. We didn't know what was happening. They took us. It's okay, baby, I whispered, holding her tight. I'm here now. Alex's arms wrapped around me just as fiercely, his small body shaking. I would burn the world down for this moment. The woman in the suit cleared her throat, clearly still under the delusion that she had authority here. Mr. Carter, she said, you have no right to be here. These children were placed under temporary HOA guardianship. Shut up. My voice was so low, so venomous that the entire room froze. The officer stormed in behind me. Ma'am, one of them said, step away from the children. She scoffed. I don't think you understand. The HOA has legal grounds to. You are not the government, I snapped. You are not the police. You are not a legal entity with jurisdiction over anything, and you sure as hell don't have the right to detain minors. She opened her mouth to argue, but I turned to the officer. Arrest her. The lead cop didn't hesitate. Ma'am, you are under arrest for unlawful detainment and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. What? This is ridiculous. Her words were cut off as the officer spun her around and locked handcuffs onto her wrists. I pulled my kids behind me, shielding them as she screeched. This is an outrage. We are a legal governing body. No, you're a glorified neighborhood watch with a power complex. I spat. And you're about to learn what real legal power looks like. The legal war begins. By the time I got back home, HOA board members were already scrambling. They knew they'd screwed up. I could feel it in the air, in the nervous glances from my neighbors, in the way HOA members were suddenly pretending they had nothing to do with what had just happened. But they weren't getting away with it. Karen Wilkes, the smug HOA president, had already been booked at the county jail for kidnapping and conspiracy. Now, I had bigger plans. I called Elliot, my attorney, and told him to get the paperwork ready. We were taking the HOA down. This isn't just a civil suit, I said, pacing my office. I want criminal charges across the board. Wire fraud, illegal detainment, conspiracy, abuse of power, and racketeering. Elliot let out a low whistle. You're going for the kill. They took my kids, Elliot, I said coldly. They kidnapped them, and they thought they could get away with it. I don't just want them fined, I want them destroyed. The next morning, I filed an official federal lawsuit against the Willow Creek HOA. The charges were brutal. The lawsuit named every single board member who had signed off on my children's removal, hitting them with federal charges that would make sure none of them ever saw the outside of a courtroom again. Then I went a step further. See, the one thing Karen and her little cronies never expected was that I had access to judicial resources that they couldn't even fathom. I pulled every financial document from their HOA records. I subpoenaed their bank statements, their internal communications, and their so-called legal fees. And what I found? Oh, it was beautiful. They had been embezzling money from residents for years. Fraudulent fines, fake maintenance fees, shell companies funneling money into board members' private accounts. The entire operation was a scam. Not only had they kidnapped my children, but they had been robbing every single person in this neighborhood for nearly a decade. Elliot called me 2 days later, barely containing his laughter. You're not going to believe this, he said. Karen's lawyer just called me. She's trying to take a plea deal. I smirked. What's she offering? She'll admit to the kidnapping if we drop the financial fraud charges. I chuckled darkly. Absolutely not. I wanted all of them in jail. 2 weeks later, the entire HOA collapsed. Every board member was indicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and illegal detainment. Karen was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The HOA was disbanded permanently, and every single illegal fine they had ever issued was refunded with damages. And me? I sat on my front porch, sipping a cup of coffee, watching my kids play in the yard, knowing that the HOA would never, ever bother another family again. They tried to take my kids, but they forgot who I was, and I made sure they paid for it. The fallout from the arrests hit the neighborhood like a wrecking ball. Residents whispered in hushed tones, news crews camped outside the once pristine HOA clubhouse, and the remaining board members scrambled like cockroaches in the light. But I wasn't done. I had spent years in courtrooms watching criminals attempt last-minute power grabs, and I knew exactly what came next. They were going to try to save themselves. And they did. First came the smear campaign. Flyers appeared on doorsteps claiming I had misused judicial influence to unfairly attack the HOA. Online community groups filled with posts about how I had manipulated law enforcement and how I was a dangerous tyrant who didn't respect the rules of the community. A few die-hard HOA loyalists, a group of retirees who probably framed their HOA violation notices like war medals clung to the idea that the board had been acting in their best interest. But the truth was out, and no amount of gossip could erase the fact that the HOA had kidnapped 2 children and defrauded an entire neighborhood for years. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic. They had already lost, and I was about to make sure they stayed down. A week after Karen's arrest, I received an email from the HOA's remaining legal counsel, a desperate, sniveling lawyer named Brent Holloway, who had clearly been hired in a panic after the board's usual attorneys either fled or were arrested. The subject line was laughable: settlement proposal for HOA reformation. I opened the email, scanning through the message, and nearly burst out laughing. They were trying to reinstate the HOA. The surviving board members were claiming that Karen had been acting alone and that the HOA itself was an essential governing body for community integrity. They offered to drop all fines, refund a portion of stolen money, and promised never to interfere with my family again if I agreed to back down and withdraw my lawsuit. I stared at the screen for a moment, then calmly forwarded the email to Elliot, my attorney. My response? Not only was I rejecting their offer, but I was filing an additional motion to freeze all HOA funds, preventing them from using stolen money to fund their legal defense. Within hours, a judge approved it. Every remaining dime in the HOA's accounts was locked. That was the final nail in the coffin. The board was now legally powerless. They couldn't hire a legal team, they couldn't issue fines, they couldn't even pay their electric bill. The HOA was officially bankrupt. Then, the foreclosure started. Turns out, when you commit years of financial fraud, the government tends to want that money back. The IRS got involved. The county tax assessor's office launched an investigation. The board members' personal accounts were audited, and wouldn't you know it, every single one of them had been skimming money for years. Karen had been paying herself an undisclosed salary directly from HOA funds. The vice president had been using community fees to finance his vacation home. The treasurer had been laundering money through fake maintenance contracts. It was a beautiful disaster. Civil suits piled up as wronged residents came out of the woodwork, demanding restitution. And one by one, the houses belonging to the former board members went up for auction. That's when I made my final move. See, the HOA had spent years terrorizing people, manipulating rules, and extorting families out of thousands. But now they were vulnerable, and I knew exactly how to finish this fight. I called Elliot. "How many board members have been forced to sell their homes?" I asked. He did some quick calculations. "At least 7. Why?" I smiled. "Because I want to buy them." The plan was simple. I was going to own their legacy. I wasn't just going to dismantle the HOA, I was going to erase it from existence. With Elliot's help, I quietly funneled my earnings into real estate acquisitions, snapping up every board member's property as they went into foreclosure. Within 6 months, I owned the majority of the properties that once belonged to the most powerful HOA members. And when I had control of enough homes, I held a neighborhood-wide vote to permanently dissolve the HOA. The turnout was overwhelming. The vote passed with 92% approval. The remaining 8%, mostly the die-hard HOA fanatics, had no choice but to accept defeat. I watched the final meeting with satisfaction. The HOA's official dissolution was marked by the removal of the hideous Willow Creek HOA sign that had once greeted residents at the neighborhood entrance. I personally hired a demolition crew to rip it out of the ground and watched as it was reduced to rubble. No more fines, no more abuse of power, no more entitled board members dictating people's lives. My neighborhood was finally free. And Karen? Well, she wasn't smiling anymore. She had pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but she still got 8 years in prison. The rest of the board members received varying sentences for conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Every single one of them had a criminal record now. No HOA, no power, no future in our neighborhood. The next morning, I sat on my front porch with a cup of coffee, watching my kids play in the yard, finally safe, finally free from the insanity that had plagued us for months. Sophie was laughing, kicking a soccer ball to Alex, who was smiling like nothing had ever happened. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle in my chest. The HOA thought they could take my children. They thought they could manipulate the law, wield power they never truly had, and silence me. But they forgot one crucial fact. I'm a federal judge, and I don't lose. The HOA was dead, but I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Winning in court, dismantling their power, and watching their homes go up for auction had been satisfying, but I knew how people like them operated. Scum like this always try to crawl back. The moment they got out of prison, they'd try to weasel their way into some new HOA, or worse, move to another neighborhood and start this cycle all over again. No, that wasn't going to happen. I was going to make damn sure the Willow Creek HOA wasn't just dead, it was buried so deep that no one would even whisper its name again. So, I got to work. The first step? Legislation. I had spent my career in the judicial system, and I knew that HOA abuse wasn't just a problem in my neighborhood, it was everywhere. People across the country had been harassed, fined, extorted, and even forced out of their homes by power-hungry HOA boards who thought they were above the law. I had just exposed one of the worst offenders, and I wasn't about to waste this momentum. I contacted a few senators and state representatives I had worked with on federal cases, and I laid everything out. The kidnapping, the fraud, the illegal surveillance, the financial abuse. I provided proof documents, emails, recordings, even police reports detailing the extent of the corruption. And just like that, I had their attention. Within a month, I was standing in a packed legislative hearing, testifying before state lawmakers about the systemic corruption of HOAs and how unchecked power had nearly ruined my family's life. I made my case clear. HOAs needed stronger legal oversight, caps on fines, mandatory external audits, and most importantly, criminal liability for board members who abused their positions. The result? New laws were passed. The HOA Accountability Act was born, and with it, HOAs across the state were stripped of the unchecked power they had enjoyed for decades. No more absurd fines. No more shady accounting. No more HOA boards running neighborhoods like personal kingdoms. They would be watched, regulated, and prosecuted if they stepped out of line. But that was just step one. Step two, public humiliation. I wasn't going to let Karen and her goons fade into obscurity. They weren't just criminals, they were examples of what happened when people abuse power. I leaked everything to the press. Every fraudulent document, every shady financial transaction, every smug email where they mocked homeowners for being too scared to fight back. News outlets ate it up. Local HOA president sentenced to prison after illegally kidnapping children. Judge exposes multi-million-dollar HOA fraud scheme. State cracks down on HOA corruption after shocking case of abuse and financial theft. Karen's mugshot was everywhere. Her once pristine reputation completely destroyed. No company would hire her. No respectable neighborhood would accept her. She was poison. The other board members weren't spared either. Their names were forever tied to one of the biggest HOA scandals in state history. They had gone from smug rulers of a suburban empire to social outcasts overnight. Step 3. The HOA's final financial ruin. See, even though the HOA had been dismantled and their funds had been frozen, I knew there was one last way to make them suffer: the lawsuits. The people in my neighborhood who had been wronged by this corrupt organization, I helped them sue. Every single resident who had been unfairly fined, threatened, or extorted was now suing the former board members personally, and I made sure those lawsuits stuck. I personally paid for the best legal team money could buy to represent the victims pro bono. The result? Bankruptcy. One by one, the former HOA leaders were hit with civil judgments they could never recover from. Karen lost her home, her car, her savings, everything. The vice president, who had used HOA funds to finance a vacation home, foreclosed. The treasurer, who had funneled money into shell companies, now drowning in legal debt. These people had spent years ruining others financially. Now, they were getting a taste of their own medicine. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, I took away their future. Step 4. Blacklisting. Thanks to my connections in legal and financial circles, I made sure every major real estate firm, homeowner association network, and corporate hiring office knew exactly who these people were. They wouldn't be able to run another HOA, get a job in property management, or even rent a decent apartment without someone recognizing them from the scandal. Their power-hungry games were over. They had no home, no money, no influence, and no way to rebuild. They were officially ruined. I didn't stop there. Step 5. Turning their legacy into a joke. The former HOA clubhouse, the place where these people held their illegal meetings, orchestrated their fraud, and lorded their fake power over innocent homeowners? I bought it. That's right. During one of the many auctions for their seized assets, I made sure to personally purchase the HOA clubhouse. And what did I do with it? Turned it into a community center. No more board meetings, no more violation notices, just a place for the neighborhood to come together. We put in a swimming pool. We added a basketball court. We made sure the place became a symbol of freedom from HOA tyranny. People loved it. And Karen? The last time I saw her was in court. She was being formally sentenced, tears in her eyes, her designer clothes swapped for an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled. She begged for leniency. She cried about how she had only been trying to uphold the integrity of the community. I leaned forward, meeting her dead in the eyes. "You kidnapped my children," I said, my voice low and even. "You stole from innocent families. You thought you were above the law. You deserve everything that's happening to you." She tried to respond, but the judge banged the gavel. 10 years. No parole. It was over. And just like that, the Willow Creek HOA ceased to exist. No corrupt board, no ridiculous rules, no illegal fines, just a peaceful, happy neighborhood. I had turned their empire into dust. And now, every time I sat on my porch, drinking my morning coffee, watching my kids play without fear, I smiled because I knew that no HOA would ever dare mess with me again. The Willow Creek HOA was dead. Its leaders were in prison, its stolen money returned, and its former headquarters now a community center where children played and families gathered without fear of absurd fines or overreaching rules. But as I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over my peaceful HOA-free neighborhood, I knew I wasn't finished. Because the truth is, HOAs aren't just a local problem. What happened here? The fraud, the financial abuse, the kidnapping, it was happening everywhere. Across the country, homeowners were being bullied, extorted, and manipulated by the very organizations that were supposed to protect them, and I was not going to let it happen again. I had seen firsthand what unchecked HOA power could do. I had fought and destroyed one of the worst, but that wasn't enough. If I really wanted to make a difference, if I really wanted to ensure that no one else would ever have to go through what my family had endured, I needed to make sure HOAs across the country were permanently crippled. Step 1. Setting a legal precedent. My court case against the HOA had already shattered the local system, but I wanted to take it national. With Elliot's help, I worked to turn my case into a legal precedent that could be used against corrupt HOAs everywhere. We drafted amendments to the HOA Accountability Act, ensuring that any HOA that engaged in illegal detainment, fraud, or abuse of power would face automatic federal review. No more hiding behind vague state laws or private contracts. If they committed crimes, they would face real, tangible consequences. I worked with lawmakers, testified in hearings, and made sure that the loopholes that had allowed Karen and her ilk to operate unchecked were permanently closed. It took months, but in the end, we won. The revised laws passed unanimously, and suddenly, HOAs across the country found themselves under the strictest oversight they had ever seen. The power they had abused for decades, gone. Step 2. Destroying their financial backbone. HOAs thrived on fear and money. They made their power seem absolute by scaring people into compliance, and they funded their operations by issuing bogus fines and excessive fees. So I made sure they could do neither. I funded a new legal organization, the Homeowners Defense Fund. Its sole purpose? Helping homeowners fight back. We provided free legal aid to anyone being unfairly targeted by an HOA. We educated people on their rights, showed them how to fight illegal fines, and helped them overturn fraudulent property restrictions. And when HOAs realized they were losing money, that the endless stream of fines and fees that had once lined their pockets were now being challenged in court and struck down, they started collapsing. One by one, abusive HOAs began to dissolve, unable to sustain themselves without their extortion racket. And the best part? Homeowners were winning their neighborhoods back. Step 3. Exposing the HOA industry. This wasn't just about small-time HOA boards run by power-hungry retirees. There were corporations behind this. Massive property management firms that trained and funded HOAs to maximize profit, that lobbied for weaker regulations, that used fraudulent accounting to siphon money from homeowners under the guise of community upkeep. They had been untouchable for years, hiding behind legal protections, keeping their finances sealed under private contracts. But now, I knew their game, and I had every intention of blowing it wide open. I spent months gathering insider information, working with journalists and former HOA board members who had been pressured into corruption. What we uncovered was staggering: massive embezzlement, illegal kickbacks from construction firms, secretive slush funds used to manipulate local politics. It was an industry of control, built on the idea that no one would ever fight back. But they hadn't counted on me. The resulting expose was devastating. News networks ran headline after headline about the deep-rooted corruption in HOAs. Investigations were launched at the state and federal levels. And within months, the biggest property management firms responsible for funding corrupt HOAs were hit with lawsuits, government audits, and massive fines. Their stock prices plummeted. Their executives resigned in disgrace, and soon, they started shutting down entirely. Step 4. Erasing OA power forever. With their legal shield shattered, their finances crippled, and their corporate backing gone, HOAs were no longer the unchallengeable forces they once were. But I wanted to go one step further. I wanted to destroy their very existence. So I launched the Abolish HOAs initiative. It started as a simple petition movement, a call for homeowners to reject HOA governance in their neighborhoods. It caught fire. People who had been terrorized by their HOAs for years, those who had been fined into bankruptcy, who had lost their homes, who had been bullied and harassed over the smallest infractions, came forward in droves. Millions signed on. Entire neighborhoods voted to dissolve their HOAs. Laws were proposed to make HOA membership voluntary rather than mandatory, ensuring that no one could ever be forced into one again. And then came the final blow. Step 5. Making HOAs a national joke. The final nail in the coffin wasn't a law or a lawsuit. It was public humiliation. See, for years, HOAs had maintained power because they were seen as legitimate. People feared them, respected their authority. But once we exposed them, once we made them a laughingstock, their influence evaporated. Late-night hosts mocked them relentlessly. Memes about insane HOA violations flooded the internet. Documentaries about corrupt HOAs and their downfall became some of the most watched films of the year. It became social suicide to admit you had been an HOA president. These people who once thrived on control and intimidation were now laughingstocks. No one feared them anymore. And that was the real victory. I knew we had truly won when, 1 year after Karen Wilkes' sentencing, I received an email from a former HOA board member I had taken down. It was short, pathetic, desperate. I lost everything. I can't get a job. I can't even rent an apartment. Please, I need help. I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the arrogant, smug woman who had tried to take my children, who had thought she could ruin lives and walk away unscathed. Then, without hesitation, I deleted it. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. As I sat back on my porch, watching my kids run across the yard, free, safe, happy, I knew that HOAs would never terrorize another family again, and if they ever tried, they'd have to answer to me. Because I wasn't just the man who destroyed the Willow Creek HOA, I was the man who destroyed all of them.